I just got a text from a friend of mine a little earlier who said he's at a conference here in Atlanta with defects workers, attorneys, juvenile court judges, and advocacy groups. I tell you that to remind you that however you feel about being here today, you could be somewhere worse. Let's have a brief invocation, if we will. Father in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity to serve you and to serve our neighbors and our communities, and for the opportunity to work toward making our communities better places to live and educate our families. And I pray, Lord, that you would give us wisdom in this process. And I pray, Lord, that for those who we know may be in pain or in difficult times, I pray that you give them peace. And I pray that the promise of your peace that passes understanding would be in our hearts and minds today as we face whatever we face at the end of this meeting or through this meeting. And I ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So today is our final public hearing in the committee today. We had a sign-up sheet. Is there anybody who wanted to sign up to speak that didn't sign up? If you would just, what I'm going to do today is I notice there are a few people who have signed up previously to speak and have spoken previously. So for those of you who've signed up a second time, I'm going to ask you to keep the comments very brief. And then if it's your first time to speak, then we'll certainly give you the full 10 minutes. The process after today will be we're going to open the opportunity for anybody to submit anything in writing they'd like to. You can email that to me at my house email address, which is christian.coomer@house.ga.gov. Is that right? Okay. And christian.coomer@house.ga.gov. And you can send any commentary, any reports, anything in writing that you'd like for us to consider as a committee. Just send that to us by Thursday, the 30th. And then the committee will start working on a draft report, and we should hopefully have a final report ready for you within the first 10 days or so of the month. So that's our goal going forward from here. So with that, let's see. I've got a few folks signed up here. I'm going to start with Mr. Urbach. Is that correct? Did I pronounce that correctly? I'm going to start with you because you were not you didn't speak at the last meeting, so I'm going to let you start today, and remind you to please keep it to 10 minutes. And also, I did this at the last committee meeting, and I just want to do it again today before you start. The purpose of this committee, or the resolution forming the committee, directed the committee to evaluate whether a recommendation should be made to strengthen Georgia's standards in civics education, and to that extent, would it be beneficial to, or that, so we are tasked with reviewing current status of civics education in the state of Georgia. We've done that. To review other states' methods of delivering civics education in their respective states, and the committee members have a report on that before you. And to review any work that nonprofit civics education providers are currently doing in our state and nationwide. We've heard some of that, and I hope to hear some more of that through the emails that we get in the next few days. And then finally to make recommendations. So we'll be doing that through our committee report. So today, we're really focused on those first three things. If you'd like to talk about current status of civics education in Georgia, or if you want to talk about other states' methods for delivering civics education, or if you want to talk about work that nonprofit civics education providers are currently doing here or other places in the country, then those are the three things we're really focused on today. So with that, Mr. Urbach, thank you for being here. And yes, at the podium would be great.
Christian, thank you so much, and everyone else that I just recently met for the first time, thank you for being here. And everyone here in the audience, thank you. My name is Mark Allen Urbach, and I taught in Gwinnett County for 11 years, 2001 to 2012. I was a master educator. I'm currently a candidate for governor of the great state of Georgia for 16 weeks now, but I'm here for education because, like our former governor, Ellis Arnold, in 1943 and 1947, his famous quote that's on his statue right across the street, quote, "Education is the cure of ignorance, poverty, and disease," end quote. Many of my friends around the state of Georgia, educators, college professors around the nation, my friends in the Congress, friends in the Trump administration, they say that Common Core is causing ignorance, poverty, and disease. Okay, that's what they say. Sometimes I agree with them. But I want to speak to you about, this is about civics education, correct? Okay. So again, I taught for 11 years in Gwinnett County, 5 years at Richards Middle School, Georgia history, and at Norcross High School, a combination of world history, U.S. history, civics, and economics. From my professional opinion, that civics is not taught properly in any way, shape, or form in terms of the foundations of civics are not taught. They're not AKS, okay? One example is everyone believes there's 3 branches of government. There's 5, and I've studied with Justice Antonin Scalia proving there is 5, okay? And our Constitution starts with the Declaration of Independence, the consent of the governed, okay? When presidents sign those official documents, they go done in the year of our Lord, 2012, and of the independence of the United States, the 240th. That's connection. But civics, I have some things just typed out. It's just a couple things that I put together real quick, as I just found out about this meeting this morning from one of my staffers who told me, "Mark, you got to come to the meeting." So, our Constitution right here, the seal is wisdom, justice, and moderation. That's why I'm running for governor. We need to get a lot more proper wisdom, a lot more justice, and a lot more moderation in the classroom. Enough of the computerized, more writing and reading. So, civics education, what I've seen in the textbook, there are many sentences and paragraphs and pages that are correct, but again, the foundation is not there. It's not taught to the students that the people, okay, the consent of the governed, are the masters of the government. That their role is to keep every elected official and appointed official in line with what should be doing, what should be properly going on. One example, we've all heard of revisionism, biases, and propaganda, but I call it deletism. Whole sections are deleted out of the textbook, whether it's on purpose or the professors who write it don't know. And one example is the first time our founding fathers met at the Continental Congress. There was a rumor that Boston was under attack. And the textbook says in about 3 lines, the first time our founding fathers met, I think it was 1774, September 17th or 16th, that they sent an olive leaf petition branch to King George. There's no mention of the true event of that meeting. They prayed out of the Holy Bible for approximately 3 to 4 hours. Reverend Jacob Duché led them in prayer. He read the 35th Psalm and gave them the inspiration to fight back against a tyrant. There's no mention of that in the textbook. That's one example of deletism. And this whole sections of American history in terms of civics and American government in the American Revolution chapter are not there. They're gone. And I'm a master educator. I know
Let me
what
interrupt
should
you
be
just a
taught.
second.
So yes, sir, Christian.
And I appreciate what you have to say.
Yes, sir.
And I think that's a valuable point that you're making. But I do think you're talking about a history education course, not so much civics education. So can you
Yes, sir.
help us focus it specifically to specific points of civics education in Georgia
Yes,
or
sir.
other states that you think we should model?
Thank you so much, and you are correct. I went macro on history. You are correct. Thank you. In terms of civics, the students are not properly taught why the founding fathers, righteous Christians, because they don't use that terminology, why they established the Electoral College. It's not ingrained in the textbook, and the teachers don't teach it, because I talked with the teachers for 11 years. Okay, that's one example. I'm sure you know about the reasons why they established the Electoral College. That's one example that's not properly taught in the textbook. Okay, another example is in terms of the government. The government, during the American Revolution, issued proclamations for humiliation, fasting, and prayer. That's our government. It's not done today. They're called National Days of Prayers, and because we're in Nonsenseville out there, that people don't even care about it. It's because the elected officials don't know the proper civics and government that created the foundation for this great nation. That's another example. One more example, and then I think my time is going to be up because we have a lot of other people that want to partake this morning. All right, this is government. official documents that end wars are documents, which is the government. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1791, that ended officially the American Revolution. It's not in the textbook, but the first line of the Treaty of Paris in 1791 that John Jay, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams signed, quote, "In the name of the most holy and undivided Trinity." The American Revolution was a Christian revolution, fought in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And as a Messianic Jew, I know this information. I've studied it a lot the last 11 years as I taught in Gwinnett County, and I've really, really hunkered down the last 5 years of my life, averaging about 15-hour days reading primary source documents, the private writings of the Founding Fathers, the private writings of our Founding Mothers, and all the official documents. So like I said, I wasn't prepared to come here and leave you with information because I just found about this meeting today. But if you'd like to contact my office, I know I'm a candidate for governor, and I know there's certain protocols that you cannot do, but I'll be more than happy to leave with you a lot of valuable information for you, for our children of this great state, because they are our future. And the reason why some people in Georgia don't feel they have a part in their government is because they're not taught properly in the classrooms. Did I answer your question, Christian? Okay. Any other questions?
Any members have questions? No. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you so much. It was very nice meeting you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Let's see. I think we'll go with Ms. Cook, Sita Cook. I know you were with us the last time and offered a few comments. If you want to kind of fill in any of the gaps that you left the last time, that'd be great. I do remember that you were our lowest timed speaker the last time. So
I've got one page. I don't know if that's going to make it.
I just want to set you up so that you can meet your same measure of success again.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. As I think I said last time, that I didn't come to the last meeting prepared to speak. You know, it's just when I heard the topic, I knew that it was something I needed to be part of, and I appreciate what the previous speaker said about that. So I have, in the meantime, looked at what some nonprofits have been saying, at what like the state of South Carolina and Arizona had been saying, and my comments are after doing that, so they're not specifically about the states, but you can certainly ask. But I tried to boil it down to the most basic things that were important to me. Since the last meeting in October, I've been feeling mixed about what should and could come out of the hearings on civic education, and even when to use the S and when not. I find that a problem when I'm reading things, not just from you. On the one hand, over the past few years, I've been calling as often as I could for revising the expectations for all high school graduates to say that they must be ready for college, career, and citizenship. Sometimes adding on the side that they should be able to read and write on a 12th grade level. That's harder to ask for. In that spirit, I'm very pleased this discussion is happening. I appreciate the reasons for the current emphasis on STEM subjects and marketable job skills. Nevertheless, I would hate for public schools to ignore the ways in which a broader education can be even more effective in preparing students for becoming lifelong learners, including at work, and for being able to respond thoughtfully to all the decisions they might face throughout their lives, including when voting. I'm therefore pleased that we can give careful thought to actions that might guarantee that the third C, citizenship, be added to high school requirements more clearly. But I worry about calling for school lessons that are too rigid, mechanistic, or unrealistic because of too detailed a scope. And there have been some bills that had been considered before that had just this long laundry list of things. I appreciated Representative Coleman's reminder in October that the General Assembly might set requirements for what students will learn, need to know, but not how they will learn it. The most useful policies, therefore, might refer more to what general knowledge students should be able to understand to be good citizens, and to be able to apply those points, rather than this list of specific details that they can memorize but won't necessarily understand unless they have the time to go into them in depth. At a time when almost everyone is seeking to limit the number of high-stakes standardized tests, I also am nervous about adding another required test, especially if there is no flexibility in how a student can meet the requirement. I hate to think of somebody not graduating because they freaked out on still another multiple choice test or something. I can imagine saying that every student must have studied the specific topics that are covered in the 100 questions that can be used in the citizenship exam, and some states are beginning to do that. But only if there is recognition of how often those topics are already being taught and of how important it is for students and teachers to be able to discuss how to apply that knowledge to actual historical and current circumstances. As I repeatedly told my students, and I taught both high school, community college, and at West Georgia, if you rely on rote memorization of specifics that you do not understand well enough to explain to a 10-year-old, you will not remember that information for very long. And even while you remember it, you will not be able to put it to much good use. I'll add that my students would tell you that I certainly expected them to know what they sometimes thought were too many facts, including even some carefully chosen dates, but that I also expected them to be able to explain the significance of those facts. If Georgia students will have to study more than they already are about the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and maybe also the Federalist Papers, please avoid making it sound like they will need to parrot back details that are not really required knowledge for being a good citizen. There's sections in each of those that are more useful for today than others. Likewise, we should not leave out the facts that the Constitution was purposely not the length of most state constitutions, including Georgia's, because they understood it would have to be interpreted and sometimes amended over time. That its creation involved compromises, and those still have to continue, and its passage occurred only after some politicizing that was not always what we would call civil. It also came after a few men behind closed doors decided to ignore the amendment requirements in the Articles of Confederation. So they were taking a bigger leap than is sometimes acknowledged. Concerning the Federalist Papers, I don't imagine that anyone calling for their being studied expects the students to read and be able to discuss all 85 of the essays that were written to try to persuade New Yorkers to vote for the Constitution. If you haven't read recently, and I hadn't, the two that are most often mentioned, numbers 10 and 51, you might want to do so and decide what aspects of each and what level of vocabulary and just syntax you think should be required knowledge for every high school student in Georgia's public schools. I hope that together, in spite of any disagreements we might have, we can decide what will be the most effective way to help future students in Georgia graduate ready to serve their communities as knowledgeable and engaged citizens. Thank you.
Are there any questions from the committee? Nothing. Thank you. And you recommended reading 10 and 51, correct? Okay.
When you go on Google, those are the ones that came up.
Okay, thank you. All right, next is Mr. Kraft, Ken Kraft. And of course, Mr. Kraft, we heard from you at the previous meeting, so hopefully you can fill in whatever blanks were left and leave some time for questions.
Very good. Yes, I switched over to a notebook this time, given the projection issues in here. So I've got to reference some old, some new things in here, so I thought, well, I'd just flip through the tabs and highlight what's in each section. There's an executive summary in the front that highlights most of the points. So starting in tab number 1, that was in the old book. It's just a summary of the South Carolina bill, which I think is a very good starting point. Tab number 2 is extracts from that booklet from the National Association of Scholars with their recommendations about civics classes. Particularly number 1, they agree with South Carolina. It should be both high school and college involved here. And number 4, focus on traditional requirements that can only be done in the classroom, none of the new civics that require occupying buildings and organizing riots. Tab number 3, this is new. I mentioned it briefly before, but I dug into it a little bit. Hillsdale College, nationally known for their patriotism and Constitution work. They have an online class called Constitution 101. The first page is all the contact people. And I was really struck. There's 10 lectures. And in addition to the historical ones in the beginning we usually think about, near the end they talk about some of the contemporary challenges, like the progressive assault on the Constitution. So it seems to be very up-to-date discussion, which should make for a lively college-level class. I've got some highlights of the lectures. Each one has a lecture by a national known expert, And they've recommended readings linking to original documents and discussion questions. Tab number 4, also from Hillsdale, they have a charter school initiative. It's a very classical scholar school program, but they do have a lot of civics and history in there. I've just highlighted a few pages at the first clip. In 8th grade, some of the issues they cover in civics, and then you flip to the back, they have similar things in their government in the 11th grade. So that's just some extra items. Number 5 was previously mentioned. A number of states are requiring students to pass the naturalization citizenship test, but I think that's the bare minimum. We can do much better than that. And number 6 is just reprising my recommendations from before. We need a blue ribbon panel led by elected official, heavy on veterans. They were totally excluded the last time they reviewed civics in 2016. Veterans, patriotic groups, and some of these out-of-town experts. Obviously, the teachers and citizens would be involved. And specifically, implement a South Carolina Principles Act as part of an expanded civics class. And then the second thing would be to restore the BOE's sovereignty by pushing back against advanced placement. We are not going to accept any civics changes from the advanced placement without a full board review by the State Board of Education, which does not happen and I think should happen according to Title 20. Again, I mentioned last time, we might be the last generation that truly understands the foundation and the importance of this country, and we have a great chance here to get better civics education for our students in Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Ms. Chandler.
Probably misunderstood you, Ken, but did you say a civics AP class? Is there such a thing?
Government and politics
Oh, yes, I'm
is the
aware of
AP
that.
version
Yes.
that you can opt out of Georgia government and civics.
Yes.
And
Okay.
they are revising that again next spring, and I'm afraid they're going to be including new civics things in as from what I read about it. And again, the state board needs to review all those AP changes, which is not currently done.
Any other questions? All right, thank
Very
you very
good.
much.
Thank you.
And finally, Caitlin Dooley. All right, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Caitlin McMunn-Dooley from the Department of Education. I'm Deputy Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, and I'm pleased to share with you some answers to some questions that were coming up in between this meeting and the prior meeting. One of the things that I mentioned in the prior meeting was a Civic Engagement Diploma seal. This seal has been drafted and has been reviewed by our Social Studies Advisory Committee, which consists of educators, industry leaders, which would be mostly non-governmental organizations and veterans, and then also community members are part of that advisory. Every content area that we have in curriculum and instruction has an advisory of about 50 people. So they've reviewed this. It's also gone out to several different professional organizations in social studies education. And this is what we're presenting to them, and we're presenting to you as a possibility, an idea that if you all liked this, we could move forward with it. It simply is a civics engagement diploma seal that would be an optional seal for students to opt into as a way to give kudos and an award and celebrate the learning that students do as they take on additional responsibilities in the area. Another thing that came up in the last meeting was the idea of the citizenship test. We have taken all of the items from the citizenship test and put them into the test pad, which is in the student longitudinal data system. So teachers can select those citizenship test items and utilize them how they like. You'll notice that the citizenship test is part of the diploma seal requirements as proposed. The second item in your folder looks like this, and this is each question from the citizenship test as well as the standards that would go along with those test items from grades kindergarten through 12th grade. So we expect that most students would be well equipped to answer these questions, and this would be, again, an optional thing. The questions about the standards have come up, so I've also included this sheet. This is our process for developing state standards. The standards for social studies, which include government civics, as well as other social studies classes that include civics education across the grade levels, have been developed over time, and so you have the timeline and process that we have for developing standards. And this was created and approved by the State Board of Education. This is how we develop all standards across the content areas. And then finally, I sent this to you in a email, but it is the social studies standards across all grade levels that directly relate to civics education, so that you can see how we grow civics education across a child's development. And so this is just for your information as you contemplate your role in this, and if there are any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Can you first answer a question not related to your topic, but actually to something Mr. Kraft said about the AP curriculum is not reviewed by the state board with regard to government and politics courses. Can you speak to that? Is that accurate, and can you explain that to me?
It is accurate. Our AP courses are not reviewed in the same way that our other courses are reviewed by the board, and that's because they're developed by AP, and we don't have purview over the intellectual property of those courses. So we don't have the ability to change them and maintain any intellectual property.
Okay, I understand that. Mr. Benton, did you have what number? 26. Okay,
26.
should be on.
Okay. Thank you for the folder of information. I had a question about the standards, especially in the middle school area.
Mm-hmm.
The standards as far as government and civics go, are they intended to be taught as a standalone unit, or are they intended to be taught all along through the curriculum for the entire year? The reason I'm asking is I was looking at the Georgia Studies Standards, mm-hmm. and it seems to be that we're talking about Georgia government, but we're not doing a real good job, or maybe it's found in 6th and 7th, and maybe even in elementary. We don't talk about the federal government much, and I feel like you need to know about the federal government to understand the state government and why it came about the way it did. And,
So,
go
great
ahead.
question. In middle school, we talk about Georgia's government, and really it's Georgia's government and other social sciences related to Georgia. So we also talk about geography as well as civics, and government falls into that. We also talk about history. So that's in 8th grade, and in the document that looks like this, it's on page 6. Mm-hmm. And then the other two grades in middle school, we talk about the Middle East, we talk about South America, we talk about Africa, and we talk about Europe. So it really is more about different continental studies, and we take specific countries and look at their governments in order for students to understand differences in how governments exist. But if you look at the K-12 standards, you'll see that Georgia is touched upon, and the federal government are touched upon across all grades from kindergarten all the way through 12. So middle school is more about, in 6th and 7th grade, it's more about international studies, and then in 8th grade, we come back to Georgia. And in K through 5, we're really starting with the child at the center, so talking about their world, their community, and then building out through 5th grade. So middle school's kind of hard to just take without understanding how they got to that point in 5th grade. I hope that answers your question.
Can I ask another question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
If you go back to elementary school, and I had a grandson that was in 3rd grade last year, mm-hmm. and I didn't like the curriculum at all, because it seemed like that we were we were going out of our way to try to find folks that maybe were not, I really don't know the term to use, but they were not the best. Some of them were not the best examples to use. But we've gone into the 8th grade, and in the standards, we've taken Nancy Hart out and some other things that are really important. I would think that a lady that helped with the revolution would have been very important to keep in there. And I worry about us trying to teach too much in the lower grades. They're not going to remember this stuff. I had 8th graders that couldn't remember it from one week to the next. But the idea that that we spend a lot of time on government, or don't spend a lot of time on government, whichever side you're on, it would seem to me that where we need to spend that time would be more as the children mature than when they're not mature. Does that make sense to?
You would want to take developmental progressions
Yes.
into consideration?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you letting me ask those questions.
Mr. Coleman. I don't know. If you'll stop pushing that button, I'll push mine.
I'm pushing you.
There you go.
There, hey, I push you on, I'm off. All right. Hey, thank you. On this, so that everyone understands, I think this is important about how anything we teach is discussed, rediscussed, and debated. And you gave us the handout so that everyone understands this. We review all of our standards and what we're doing. What schedule you have? 4 or 5 years? What are we on now?
It is written in law that it's 4 years, but then it was changed recently to be instead of shall, it was changed to may. So, but we're about every 4 years.
About every 4 years, okay. And if I'm not mistaken, you bring in teachers. It's a large group, of course, university, How about the general public? Where are they allowed to? How do you identify John Q. Public that's on? Do you send out a request? Anyone who wants to volunteer? How do you do that?
So we do a survey at the very beginning with the current standards to everyone.
Now, let's talk about the committee first off.
Okay.
How do you establish this committee? Because it says you have teachers, university, technical college, department of early care, business and industry as appropriate. If John Q. Public wants to be on there, how do they know that you're going to do this? How do y'all notify? Through the schools or how?
It's usually through the public survey. So the public survey that starts the process for
Right.
standards review includes a checkbox where it would say, I'm interested in, participating more or learning more.
Do all parents get a copy of that survey?
It goes out through all of our channels, through the Department of Education, social media, as well as media releases that often get picked
How
up by
about, does it go out through
newspapers.
the schools?
It does. It goes out to every school superintendent.
And they
then
send it to all their parents?
I would hope so.
Well, I'm just
but
asking.
I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, we hope so, but yes, that is, that's something that we don't have control over. We also send it out to all the different, professional organizations and
Yeah.
school, including the PTA, so that's another channel that we can use to send
Do
it
you
out.
send that to the members of the General Assembly?
That's a good question. I believe that we do through our external affairs office.
I'm sure that we have community members who would like to get that, and we might know some folks who'd like to participate.
Yeah, we've talked
with
about that on the
yeah.
education committee in the past, that we need to be getting,
Yeah.
Now, that's my big concern, because that's the one question I hear from parents and community, is that they don't know when this is going on, and they don't see, and in your list you say business and industry. I would hope it would say parents would be
Yeah.
number one up there, that they would have I think that's all right. Then after you do that, of course, I see you have after they do it, then you create another committee to look at this information. Is that correct?
Yes, we have the working committee write the standards, write the verbiage, and then we have a second committee, the advisory committee, look at that verbiage and make any adjustments. If it's significant, then it goes back to the working committee for approval.
Right.
And if
But I
it's-
noticed on that advisory, you have RESAs, you have they're your parents. Again, I don't know how, again, my biggest concern is, I think that's where our weakness is. Like I said, legislate just the parent group, not,
Yeah.
not getting, be sure that it gets out, okay? And
Okay.
then you come back to your advisory, next
The
committee.
advisory committee, and then after that is the academic committee, which is where we make sure that all the different state agencies that deal with education are aware of the changes and approve the changes over time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
And that's done every 4 years. Again, as we did in the past, and I think this is hard for people to understand, we recommend the what,
Yeah.
as she said earlier, but we don't recommend the how. That's
True.
completely up to systems. The
Yes.
materials, the textbooks, is that correct?
That's correct.
Completely up to the local schools. All right.
Completely up to them.
I want to make sure I understand something before I move on. About the survey. The survey is sent out every 4 years? Or is it a request to participate in the survey, or how does that work? How does the survey get formed?
The survey gets formed basically when the state school board approves that we will initiate the process for revising standards. That's about every 4 years. And so once the state board approves that we will initiate that process, then we initiate the survey. The survey really is more, and this was an interesting situation when we created these standards, because we actually did 2 surveys. I was new at the Board of Education, or at the Department of Education, and agreed with you that we didn't have enough participation from industry, community, and families. So we initiated a second survey that was a little more top level. The first survey that came out was specific to the previous standards, and we were asking about specific issues that had been raised about the previous standards. And my thinking was that if you're a community member or a parent, you may not be as interested in responding to that survey. So we did a second survey and moved that through the process, where we were looking just at the topics and then some of the conversations that had come up about those topics across time. So when the committees came in to review the current standards, which are the Georgia Standards for Excellence, they were using 2 survey responses. One that was primarily educators responding, and then the second was primarily parents and community members. But again, that was something that I did when I first came into my position 2.5 years ago.
So when you say that you initiate the survey process, that's the point where you send it out on social media and to superintendents and so forth.
Yes.
So is that process established by rule, or is that just something that whoever holds the position at the time decides how they're going to roll that out?
The process is established by the board, that is by rule. And then the second survey was more, the board approved it, but it was a ad hoc
Okay.
desire to increase the information that we were getting, because we were doing science and social studies at the same time, and I was somewhat concerned that we were only getting a biased sample of educator responses without
Okay.
the others. But we do still have, whenever we do surveys, we do a lot of surveys, we do have a lot of educators respond, mostly
Sure.
because they're the ones who are paying attention to the Department of Education,
Sure.
and we're really trying hard to increase our communications beyond that audience.
So in the rule that sets out how the survey is established or implemented, is there a list of categories of people who should get the survey request included in the rule?
Not specifically, no.
Okay. So you can send it to whomever you want, whomever is in your position or whatever that position was you held at the time. I don't know if it's the same position you hold
We
now or
try to
not.
go as broad as we possibly can, yes.
I would request that you, not necessarily by rule, but by some memo or some kind of guidance,
Practice, yeah.
implement a practice of including members of the General Assembly when you send out the survey.
I understand, and we'd be happy to, thank
All
you.
right, thank you. All right, Mr. Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to ask another question. On this area of civics, if we were to have a standalone civics class, have y'all already looked to see if there are any civics text out there that would go along with what we consider to be our standards?
So We are not in the business anymore of reviewing textbooks. That was something that the legislature changed a couple years ago, and so we do not review textbooks.
Okay, so it's up to the local system to look and see what best fits their standards.
Yes, sir.
So that means that in a lot of cases, we're using books that don't necessarily fit our standards, but it's because do California and New York and Florida and Texas still control the textbook content?
I can't speak for California, New York. It used to be California and Texas. I will say, though, that when you look at the use of online materials and online resources in contrast to the textbook industry, it really is shifting over to more online resources and digital resources. So I think that was why the legislature made the move that they made the recommendation for. And so I would be remiss if I started to analyze the textbook industry right now. It's in flux.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't have any other speakers signed up. Is there anyone who wanted to address the committee that didn't get a chance to sign up? All right. So our next process will be to review the materials we've been given. If you have anything else you'd like to submit, again, please submit that to my email address, christian.coomer@house.ga.gov by Thursday, close of business Thursday. And we'll start the review after that and hopefully have a report of the committee hopefully by about the 10th of December. Thank you very much.